Genshin Impact is a game with lore that is incredibly intricate, complex, and well put together, and what makes it so special and impressive in that regard is the sheer variety of different stories and mythologies that the game draws upon for its world building from across human history. And when I say that Genshin draws from many sources, I mean many sources. Just to name a few, Hoyoverse's writers included Greek, Chinese, Egyptian, and Mesopotamian mythologies, Hinduism, Buddhism, Gnosticism, Christianity, and a bunch of stuff from Dark Souls and Berserk. Mushoku Tensei, Full Metal Alchemist, Made in Abyss, and even freaking Neon Genesis Evangelion. You name it, they've got it. What I just mentioned is but the tip of the iceberg. If you so desire, you could keep going on and on and on. However, no matter how deep you go, nothing that you will find has as much of an impact on the game's overarching cosmology than the epic opera known as the Ring of Nibelung. In this video, I want to speculate on what this divine ring may be in Genshin, along with the titanic role that it will play within the future of the story. And to do that, we are going to go over three major topics, those being, well, the 4-opera cycle itself, but that's a given, the world of Simulanka, since it is the reason I decided to make this video in the first place, and a nice little OVA called The Angel's Egg. First and foremost, what the heck is this Ring of Nibelung that I'm talking about anyway, and why should you care about it? That's an excellent question, and one that has to be answered immediately before we do anything else in this video, so let's get straight into it. The Ring of Nibelung is a cycle of 4 musical operas written by the German composer Wilhelm Richard Wagner. The 4 operas are heavily inspired by Norse mythology, where the events and conclusion build up for what is essentially their version of Ragnarok, the end of the world. Immediately, the first thing we can notice is that these 4 opera cycles correlate directly to the Samsara cycles of Tyevat's history, which Jacob Baker of the Narzinkreuz Ordo refers to as the root cycles. Here, it is important to remember that the names which the Narzinkreuz Ordo gave to these 4 cycles are not their true names. They are what the Ordo itself called them. With that in mind, the 4 cycles are the Hyperborea, which most likely refers to some ancient location up in Snezhnaya. After that, there was Natlantine, that's probably what they called Sachikanatlan, which is the empire that dominated ancient Natlan. Then we have Remuria, the empire built by Remus between Sumeru-Fontaine and Liyue, followed by the 4th and current cycle of Crown Aria, with Crown Aria obviously being Khaenri'ah. What each of these cycles have in common is that they all involve a series of empires or kingdoms that collapsed due to a combination of great floods and abyssal catastrophes. Well, except the first one. We don't really know what was going on up in the frozen tundra during the Hyperborea. Regardless, I think you get the point. This is all super important, since the Ring of Nibelung revolves around the rise and fall of the divine order of the gods. The first of the 4 cycles in the Ring of Nibelung is titled the Rheingold, and before we do anything, we can immediately start to draw some correlations between that title and what we know in Genshin. For starters, the Rheingold itself is a magical golden treasure guarded by 3 water nymphs known as the Rhine Maidens, who can be equated with the Graces, the 3 beautiful daughters of Zeus. So basically, they represent the concept of the triple goddess, and in Genshin, that role, and by proxy the role of the Rhine Maidens, is fulfilled by the 3 moon sisters, Aria, Sonnet, and Canon. While we are at it, it is also worth mentioning that Aria, Sonnet, and Canon are all names related to music and poetry. This matters for several reasons, one of which is the fact that the Ring of Nibelung is an opera, an epic music drama that is played in a theater. The title of the first cycle also has a direct and blatant connection to one of Khaenri'ah's 5 evil sinners, the alchemist Gold, since it's pretty clear that her moniker Gold is in reference to the Rheingold treasure, while her name, Rheindotter, simply means daughter of Rhine. Whatever this Rheingold is in Genshin, she almost certainly has something to do with it. Also, if the Moon Sisters are indeed the Rhine Maidens who guarded the gold, Rheindotter could be related to them in some way. The second cycle in the opera is titled The Valkyrie, and that title marks it as the cycle with the least obvious connections to Genshin at first glance, but that's not really the case. You're just gonna have to squint a little bit to see it. In Volume 1 of Vera's Melancholy, the titular character, Vera, complains to her friend Sachi about being bored and tells him how she believes that in distant worlds, the souls of 14 Valkyries burn bright in the face of calamity. Here, there are 2 different kinds of Valkyries that we are interested in for 2 distinct yet equally important reasons. The 14 Valkyries, whom Vera tells Sachi about, are an obvious reference to the Valkyries of Honkai Impact 3rd, a group of female warriors that include major characters such as Fu Hua, Himiko Murata, Raiden Mei, Bronya Zaychik, and the wife of Siegfried Kaslana, Cecilia Shariak. Now, I don't want to go too deep into Honkai lore since that's not the point. However, I brought up Siegfried and Cecilia because they are the parents of a very powerful Valkyrie called Durendal, and the protagonist of the story, Kiana Kaslana, is a clone of Siegfried's daughter who Eclipse created in an attempt to resurrect Siren, the Hersher of the Void. The main thing to keep in mind in all of this is the relationship between Siegfried and Kiana. I will get back to this later. In the Ring of Nibelung, the Valkyries are the 9 daughters of the All-Father Odin, who enforce divine law upon mortals. The most famous of them is Brunhild, who plays an absolutely crucial role in the birth of the opera's hero, Siegfried. Siegfried happens to also be the title of the 3rd cycle in the epic opera, and as the title suggests, this cycle follows the life of Siegfried, the son of Sigmund and Sieglind. More on them in a few minutes. The 3rd cycle details Siegfried's journey to become the hero, his slaying of the dragon Fafnir, and his awakening of Odin's daughter, Brunhild. Once Siegfried and Brunhild are united, the final events of the opera are set in motion, leading to the 4th and final cycle, known as the Twilight of the Gods. This Twilight is mentioned in several places, including Mr. Nine's book, Flowers for Princess Fischl, but perhaps the most prominent character who bears relation to the title of the final cycle is Vedrfolnir's brother, Dainsleif, the Twilight Sword of Canria, who we know will challenge the traveler at the end of the world in the Sea of Flowers. Alright, that just now was a lot of information that I asked you to keep in mind from the titles of the 4 cycles, except that's not actually true. You see, all you have to remember are 3 things: the Rheingold treasure, Siegfried and his daughter Kiana, and Siegfried's parents Sigmund and Sieglind, as these are the 3 topics that we need to hypothesize on what the nature of the Ring of Nibelung is in Tyevat. The story of the Ring of Nibelung kicks off when the dwarf Albrecht takes the golden treasure from the Rhine maidens and forges out of it a great magical ring, which he uses to subjugate the rest of his kin, the Nibelung dwarfs. Albrecht enslaves his people, including his own brother Mime, and forces them to forge him weapons, armor, and give him all of their gold. These Nibelung dwarfs are quite interesting because, logically speaking, they should be the Conrians in the world of Tyevat, and we have several pieces of evidence that align with this possibility. To demonstrate this, all we need to do is hop onto Simulanka, and specifically to the end of the world at the Broken Sea, where we will find ourselves in a location known as the Titanium Mines. One of the most notable features of the Kingdom of Conria was the fact that it was a nation that existed underground, but that description alone paints a quite misleading image of where the kingdom actually was. Instead of being an underground nation akin to what we see in Byakuya-koku, the Conrians had access to the ocean and the sea, with the catch being that the ocean and the sea as they understood them were metaphors for the Sea of Stars. In other words, space. So Conria wasn't just an underground nation, it was a subterranean kingdom located at the very end of the world, and this unique position gave the kingdom access to great many shipwrecked individuals who drifted from beyond the so-called Sea of Stars. It is worth pointing out that this description of the Conrians, along with where their kingdom was situated, aligns very well with what the god of sunlight, Gwyn, did to humanity in Dark Souls. Fearing the potential that the primordial humans had, along with the prophecy of the Dark Lord that would one day rise from amongst them, Gwyn decided to secret them away from his Age of Fire. To do that, he gifted the lords of the ancient humans a city at the very end of the world, which became known as the Ringed City. That's one hell of a name for the topic of this video. These ancient humans in Dark Souls were known as pygmies, and when Gwyn gave them the Ringed City, he branded them with the dark sign in the image of the Eclipse to suppress their power. Now, even though pygmies and dwarfs are not identical, they are similar enough for us to make a baseline comparison between the pygmies and the Conrians, since both were relegated to live at the end of the world, and both share the iconic symbolism of the Eclipse. If all of that isn't enough to convince you, in The Pale Princess and the Six Pygmies, which is one of the most important pieces of text in Genshin Impact, the Prince of Light and the Pale Princess make their way to the Kingdom of the Pygmies to save the deformed Pygmies' 5 brethren. This Kingdom of Pygmies is very reminiscent of the Ringed City that Gwyn gave to the Pygmies of Dark Souls, and on Tyevat, it's all but confirmed to be Conria. Especially when you consider that the 6 pygmies of the story directly coincide with Dainsleif and the 5 evil sinners, 6 incredibly prominent figures from Conria. Along with the ringed city, Gwyn gave the Pygmy Lords his youngest daughter Filianor, who sustains the illusion of the city's eternity through her slumber upon the abyssal egg. Keep in mind that the primordial one is said to have been born from an egg. According to the legendary Hidetaka Miyazaki, who is the creator and director of the Dark Souls series and its derivatives, the character of Princess Filianor is inspired by the nameless girl from Mamoru Oshii's OVA, Angel's Egg. I talk about their potential influence on Genshin in this video, but before I get to her here, we still have a couple of topics to cover. Going back to the titanium mines in Similanka, they are explicitly stated to be at the end of the world, so there isn't much for me to add by way of explanation, and the broken sea canvas visible there is clearly supposed to reflect the Sea of Stars. What really matters is the status of the area as a mine. This is because if the Conrians are indeed based upon the Nibelung dwarfs from Wagner's epic opera, then them living beneath the earth would coincide with the dwarfs who not only live in subterranean realms but are also extremely skilled miners and craftsmen. On top of that, you have to consider that the Lord of the Nibelung Dwarfs in the opera and the one who forged the ring to begin with was named Albrek. As a matter of fact, Albrek is the Nibelung Dwarf in the title of the Ring of Nibelung, and the ring in question is the one he fashions out of the Rhine gold that he took from the 3 Rhine maidens. This means that the title of the opera can also be reinterpreted as Albrek's Ring. As you all know, Albrek was one of the royal bloodlines of the Conrian Eclipse dynasty, and while we don't know if the Albreks were the dominant royal bloodline of Conria, although everything so far seems to point towards that, them being named after the dwarf who forged the Ring of Nibelung is an absolutely crucial piece of evidence. The miners at the titanium mines lived in close proximity to the dragon Durin, who himself resided beneath the Great Waterfall. In Similanka, Durin was the creation of the goddess of fate, that obviously being the Hexenzirkel witch Anya M. Andersdotter, who named him after Tyevat's Durin of Humus, the fell dragon made by one of Conria's 5 evil sinners, Rheindotter, and that Durin is in turn named after a prominent dwarf from Norse mythology. This is where things become really suspicious. Durin is not the only dragon on Tyevat that is named after a dwarf, and the House of Albrek are not the only Conrians named after dwarfs either. For some really easy examples, we have Dvalin, the dragon who killed Durin. He is also named after a Norse dwarf. And from the Conrian side, we have Dainsleif, since the short form of his name, Dane, comes from the Nordic Dain, a dwarf whose name means the dead one. These shared naming conventions build a powerful correlation between the Conrians and the dragons, and I will provide you with my current hypothesis for as to why this is the case at the end of this video. But for now, let us stick with figuring out what the Ring of Nibelung is on Tyevat first. While Albrek was busy subjugating his people, the king of the gods Odin is told about the ring by Loki. Realizing that the gods would benefit tremendously from such an object, the two make their way to the realm of the dwarfs to try and claim it. Odin and Loki meet Albrek's brother Mime, who tells them his whereabouts, and when the two gods come across the Nibelung dwarf, Albrek boasts to them how he will use the ring to rule the entire world. Loki decides to put Albrek's ambitions to the test, tricking him and rinsing him clean out of all of his wealth and treasures. Odin then drags Albrek to the surface, where he forcefully removes the ring from his hand and claims it for himself. Humiliated and devastated, Albrek lays a curse upon the ring, stating that until it returns to him, it shall inspire restless paranoia in the hearts of those who own it and murderous envy in those who do not, thus condemning all future possessors of the ring. Now, as you can probably tell, the Ring of Nibelung is an extremely long opera, so like many things, I have to obviously oversimplify it out of necessity. The gist of what happens is that Odin eventually loses the ring to a dragon named Fafnir. Fearing that Albrek might one day reclaim the ring from Fafnir and launch a vengeful attack on the gods, Odin fathers 9 Valkyries, one of whom is Brunhild, and instructs them to gather the souls of valiant heroes and make them ascend into Valhalla to become divine warriors. This is identical to what we can find in Volume 4 of Mr. Nine's Legend of the Shattered Halberd, where one of the Celestial Warriors tells of how the Celestial Emperor once went to war with the Asura, and to prepare for that war he selected soldiers from the 3 realms and made them ascend to become his celestial army after death. On that note, although she isn't explicitly mentioned by name, Genshin Impact already has a Brunhild-like figure in its mythos. In Volume 2 of Mr. Nine's book, The Legend of the Shattered Halberd, the daughter of the Celestial Emperor tells the hero of the story, Mir, how in the past she was in charge of conducting trials and sentencing at the end. So you can definitely see how certain elements of Wagner's opera are present in Genshin despite not being the major focus of the story yet. At any rate, the Valkyrie cycle of the Ring of Nibelung focuses on the love between the twin siblings Sigmund and Sieglind, who in the opera are fathered by Odin under the guise of a mortal man with a woman from the Volsung lineage. Sigmund and Sieglind become lovers and give birth to the hero of prophecy Siegfried, who does a bunch of impressive feats including killing the dragon Fafnir and shattering Odin's divine spear. Now, there is a lot more that goes into how Siegfried is born from Sigmund and Sieglind. In fact, I originally prepared an entire section discussing all of that. However, I ultimately decided to exclude it from this video as I am currently unsure of how relevant those events are to what happens in Tyevat. So instead, I will have that entire section along with all the rest of the cut content from the original script over on Patreon for anyone who cares to see it. For now, what I care about, and by the way, this part was going to be cut out as well until I remembered the Angel's Egg and then realized, hold on a sec, this is way too freaking important, is the lineage of Siegfried's parents, Sigmund and Sieglind. Earlier, I talked about how in Honkai, Siegfried Kaslana married a Valkyrie named Cecilia, with whom he had a daughter, Durendal, whom Kiana Kaslana is a clone of. Well, the hero of the Ring of Nibelung also falls in love with a Valkyrie, Brunhild, who is also his aunt, but we don't talk about that, and even awakens her from a deep slumber, just like what happens in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. However, I am not gonna go on that tangent right now, not this time. The reason I asked you to keep in mind the relationship between Kiana and her father Siegfried earlier is because that relationship has always been relevant to Hoyoverse, ever since their very first official game, Fly Me to the Moon, and it remains relevant to this day in Genshin Impact. The title of Fly Me to the Moon is a reference to Neon Genesis Evangelion, which for one of its endings uses a modified version of Frank Sinatra's iconic song, Fly Me to the Moon. And it's the moon part that matters, let me tell you why. In the Ring of Nibelung, Siegfried's parents, Sigmund and Sieglind, were fathered by Odin through a woman from the Volsung lineage, meaning that her ancestor was the legendary king Volsung of Huneland. However, in Norse mythology, the story goes differently. Originally, Sigmund and Sieglind were two of King Volsung's 11 children, 10 male and 1 female, being of course Sieglind, all from his wife, the Jotunheljod. And King Volsung himself was the son of Rerir, whom you should all recognize in Genshin as Rerir, the Moon Hunter, one of the 5 evil sinners of Khaenri'ah. In Norse mythology, Rerir was the son of Sigi, and thus a grandson of the All-Father Odin. As of the time of the recording of this video, we currently don't know what Rerir's lineage is in Genshin, and I honestly doubt that it is anything like what we see in the original Nordic myth. However, that isn't an issue in the grand scheme of things, since the important part is the fact that he is hunting the moon, and, well, this is where the real issue lies. Which moon is he hunting exactly? Since Tyevat has somewhere between 3 to 5 moons, with the actual number probably being 4. Yeah, this is bullshit, I'm just gonna have to take a guess, but I do have good arguments to support the reasoning behind my choice, hear me out. Given what we know about Khaenri'ah's history and the dynasties that ruled the kingdom, Rerir is most likely hunting down the Crimson Moon worshipped by the dynasty that preceded the Eclipse. We know that Rerir lived during the era of the Eclipse dynasty that sought to tear away the veil of sin, but something went awry and the Eclipse was swallowed by the Crimson Moon, which is another way of saying that the Crimson Moon dynasty enacted their revenge upon the Eclipse dynasty. And it is this moon that Rerir is now hunting down to avenge the Black Sun of the Eclipse. With that being said, there is a crucial point of nuance to all of this. The Crimson Moon that Rerir is hunting is also a type of eclipse. It is a lunar eclipse. Astronomically speaking, an eclipse occurs as a result of a syzygy, which is the alignment of 3 celestial bodies in a straight line. On Earth, we can observe 2 kinds of syzygies. One is the new moon syzygy, and the other is the full moon syzygy. The first is the more famous of the two, also known as a solar eclipse. It happens when a new moon positions itself right between the Earth and the Sun, plunging those in the path of totality into complete darkness during the day. This event is marked by a majestic ring of fire, wink wink, that forms momentarily around the moon during the annular solar eclipse. The full moon syzygy, on the other hand, happens right when the Earth is aligned between the sun and a full moon in such a way that the Earth casts its shadow on the moon's surface and refracts the red and orange wavelengths of light on the moon, making it appear crimson red. If this theory turns out to be true, then it completely sheds a new light on Rerir's motivations and objectives. Get it? It sheds new light because eclipse and the eclipse blocks light. No? Okay, never mind. You see, in Norse mythology, we know that Rerir was the ancestor of the Volsung lineage, from which the hero of the Ring of Nibelung, Siegfried, comes. And just like how Siegfried fell in love with the Valkyrie Brunhild in Honkai, Siegfried Kaslana fell in love with the Valkyrie Cecilia Shariak, producing Kiana in the process. And one thing you need to know about Kiana is that she is to Hoyoverse what Mickey Mouse is to Disney. So strap on your seatbelts and let me tell you a thing or two about Kiana and the Eclipse. In Hoyoverse's first official game, Fly Me to the Moon, Kiana is a witch from the House of Kaslana who attempts to find the eclipse that her father once sought and restore her family's name and honor. According to Kiana herself, the eclipse was a sacred artifact that belonged to the Kingdom of the Silver Moon during the time of her grandfather. The eclipse held authority over the order of the world and could dictate the flow of time, which is quite fitting since a solar eclipse consists of the sun and the moon, two celestial bodies that were historically crucial for humanity's understanding of the flow of time. Kiana recounts how her grandfather once warned her father about the power of the eclipse along with its corrupting nature, as he foretold the family about the existence of a conspiracy to steal it and dishonor their name. When the Silver Moon Kingdom were plunged into a war that brought their civilization to the brink of collapse, their king offered Kiana's grandfather the ability to use the eclipse to ward off their enemies. However, when the eclipse was eventually stolen, the Kaslana family naturally became the primary suspects, and Kiana's grandfather was sentenced to death on the battlefield. After the grandfather's death, Kiana's father went on to find the eclipse, and she later followed in his footsteps. To accomplish this, Kiana goes through 60 levels in the game searching for the eclipse, but what's peculiar is that by the end of Fly Me to the Moon, Kiana never finds it. So the eclipse was a powerful tool held by the Silver Moon Kingdom, which could control the flow of time and even reverse it. And in Genshin, the dark sun of the eclipse became the emblem of Kanria's ruling dynasty during its latter days, and was adopted into the 8-pointed star of the Babylonian goddess Ishtar, who in Genshin is Istaroth, the god of the 1,000 winds of time. We know that the House of Albric was a major royal family in Kanria, and they are named after the Nibelung dwarf Albric, the one who forged the Ring of Nibelung out of the Rheingold treasure in the first place. Now, in Richard Wagner's opera, the Nibelungs were a specific race of dwarfs, but in Genshin, Nibelung is the name of the Dragon King, the one who ruled the Light Realm before the creation of Tyevat after the Primordial One's invasion. From Dainsleif, we know that the kingdom of Kanria renounced the gods and never acknowledged them as anything but false. However, in a world where the gods are tangible and literally walk amongst humans, any disbelief in them absolutely necessitates an equivalent counter-belief in another more rightful authority, and I think this authority is Nibelung. One of the things that distinguished Kanria's royalty from the rest of the population was their insistence on maintaining the purity of their bloodline. In the context of Tyevat, this wouldn't really make sense unless their blood has some major property to it. Since the Albrics were based on the Nibelung dwarfs, who were extremely skilled in mining and craftsmanship, I highly suspect that the pure-blood Kanrians were descendants of the Dragon King Nibelung, and their ancestors were the Sealies. Knowing that the eclipse was the symbol of Kanria's ruling dynasty, notice how Kiana's description of the eclipse in Fly Me to the Moon matches the characteristics of the Ring of Nibelung, with both granting tremendous power and having a corrupting influence. Alright, things are about to get spicy. One of the biggest revelations that Kiana provides about the eclipse is that it has the power to control time and reverse it. And in this video behind Al-Haytham right now, I go over in rigorous detail how Kanria's name can potentially be interpreted as the betrayers of the 1,000 winds of time, where the 1,000 winds is obviously Istaroth, the god of time. Giant sundials are a reoccurring object which can be found in locations associated with Istaroth, and their association communication with her is interesting for a few reasons. A sundial is a device that can tell time using the position of the sun's shadow cast by a central pointer onto a marked surface. The purpose of a sundial is to measure the passage of time during daylight hours by indicating the hour based on the position of the shadow. As you can imagine, sundials do not function during an eclipse, since the sun's light is obscured by the moon, and no clear shadow would be cast. This makes me wonder if the betrayal that the Conrians committed against Istaroth had to do with them convincing her to surrender the authority of time to them, after which they returned that power to the eclipse. The ring of fire that forms around the moon during a solar eclipse is known as an annulus, which in Latin translates to ring. And in Genshin, I suspect that this ring might have initially belonged to none other than the Dragon King, Nibelung. Yes, as far-fetched and insane as this sounds, the ring of Nibelung might unironically be the solar eclipse. Whatever their plans were with this ring, we know that the Conrians failed miserably. In the end, their eclipse was swallowed by the Crimson Moon, and their nation was destroyed by the gods and the monsters of the abyss. But just saying that the Conrians wanted to obtain the power of the eclipse isn't much of a satisfying conclusion. After all, that's basically a given since the eclipse was their symbol. I would rather give a more substantial answer, and my current assessment, although it may be flawed, is that the Conrians were attempting to resurrect the Dragon King Nibelung in order to challenge the heavenly principles. How? Well, let me tell you of an OVA about a nameless little girl and her cherished egg. The Angel's Egg is a short animated film released in 1985 by the legendary Mamoru Oshii in collaboration with Yoshitaka Amano. The OVA follows a nameless young man in military uniform who wakes up from a dream where he sees a titanic eye gazing down upon him from the crimson sky. The nameless boy carrying his cross on his back comes across a nameless little girl in an abandoned city occupied by statuettes of fishermen who do nothing but hunt giant shadows of fish, never able to catch them. Fun fact, the quote where the traveler tells Paimon that she must be a type of fish is a very clever reference to the Angel's Egg. The egg that the nameless girl holds represents her unwavering faith and conviction. The girl doesn't know what's in the egg, or if what's inside it had already died, yet she holds onto hope, believing that the egg will one day hatch. So, she carries and protects this egg akin to a mother protecting her own child in the womb. This is really powerful imagery, and it is one that I certainly plan on discussing sometime in the future. After the boy tells the girl the story of Noah's Ark and inquires her whether there is anything inside her egg, she takes him down a hallway filled with the corpses of lizards and sea monsters until they reach an area displaying the skeleton of a giant angelic bird. As it stands right now, the bird has already died long ago, and the only one who knew of its existence until the boy saw it was the nameless girl. But if the two of them are to die or forget it, then the bird might as well have never been real, since the two of them are the only ones who know that it existed. This should be highly reminiscent of what you saw happen in Genshin with Rerir and Rukkhadevata, since that is almost exactly what their stories were about. Rerir wanted to be remembered, to exist in someone's recollection of him, so that when he died, his memory would live on through them. Rukkhadevata had the opposite desire, to completely eradicate forbidden knowledge from Irminsul. She sought to be forgotten by the world, because if no one can remember her, then no one will know that she ever lived. After showing him its skeleton, the little girl reveals to the nameless boy that she wishes to hatch the egg and return the divine bird back to the world. And although these two are very important to Genshin, make no mistake, what we care about right now isn't them, but where they are. When the Traveler and Paimon visit the world of Simulanka, they learn that it consists of three major areas. There is the Forest of Blessings, the city of Constellation Metropole, and the Broken Sea at the end of the world beyond the Great Waterfall, where the dragon Durin resides. This world structure is perfectly identical to the island upon which the story of the Angel's Egg takes place. The OVA starts with the nameless girl filling glass urns with water in a dark forest. We then follow her as she scavenges an empty city for food until she meets the nameless boy in military uniform. Finally, the OVA ends with the nameless boy standing on a vast beach looking into the distance as a titanic eye rises from the sea to gaze upon him, just like in his dream. And the young man's dream was reality. By the way, I am not excluding any details. Just like in Sri Lanka, the island in the Angel's Egg consists of a forest, a city, and a shoreline with the sea. If anything, there is even one more point of correlation. You know how at the end of Summertide Scales and Tales, Mini Dorian asks Scaramouche and Nilu to help him build a brand new boat, which they name the Dorian, as all boats should have a name? Well, at the end of the Angel's Egg, the camera zooms out, revealing that the forest, the city, and the beach where the story takes place were all part of an island appearing not unlike the hull of an overturned ship. A boat that never found land and sunk in the expanse of the ocean. Dude, I am telling you, Hoyoverse's developers are extremely talented and proficient when it comes to incorporating design elements from other stories into their world building. What's noteworthy is that the nameless girl wanted to bring back the angelic bird to life, and in Genshin, dragons are heavily associated with angels, with their king, Nibelung, being referred to by Novelette as the Heavenly Father. In other words, God. So if the Conrians were anything like the nameless girl, then at least one of their objectives would have been to resurrect the divine bird, Nibelung, back to the world. But the story of the Ring of Nibelung doesn't end there, which finally brings us back to Rerir, the moon hunter, and why I think he's hunting down the moon. It's highly unlikely that the Traveler will confront the 5 evil sinners 1v1. Rather, the more realistic scenario is that we will be ganking each sinner individually along with one or more other characters who have prior beef with them or have something to gain from killing the sinner in question. When it comes to jumping Vidrfolnir, the Traveler will receive help from Dainsleif. For Rheindaughter, we will likely jump her with Albedo and perhaps a couple of Hexencircle witches. Piero will probably help us jump Hroptatyr, since he already has a grudge against the Eclipse Dynasty sages, while Surtalogy is most likely getting jumped by the Traveler and Tartaglia. But with Rerir, I can't really think of anyone that would want to rotate with the Traveler to gank him, because at the moment, we don't have anyone that has a good enough reason to want Rerir dead. The closest person I can think of is Peruer, since she belongs to the Crimson Moon that Rerir is hunting. However, I am not sure if Perry knows who Rerir is. This is precisely why I told you to keep in mind the relationship between Siegfried and Kiana. The Titanic eye that the nameless boy sees in the Angel's Egg is mentioned in Genshin Impact, specifically in the book Perenheri, where it is revealed to be the Crimson Moon itself. A Crimson Moon is of course another name for the lunar eclipse, and in Fly Me to the Moon, Kiana's goal is to find the eclipse that her father once sought. From Hankai, we know that her father is Siegfried Kaslana, whose union with the Valkyrie Cecilia references the love between Brunhild and the Ring of Nibelung's hero, Siegfried, the son of Sigmund, who is a descendant of the Volsung clan's ancestor, King Rerir of Honaland. Now suppose that Kiana from Fly Me to the Moon somehow exists in Genshin. As the daughter of Siegfried, this would make her in some way related to Rerir, which makes sense since both of them are looking for similar things. Kiana wants to find the eclipse, while Rerir is looking for the Crimson Moon, which is just another type of eclipse. But instead of the solar eclipse, Rerir is hunting the moon itself to avenge the dark sun. Huh. That would have been really cool, right? It's a shame that Kiana isn't in Genshin. Okay, listen, the thing about Paimon is that she is mired in lunar symbolism. There are so many NPCs who liken her to the Silver Moon, and if you look at her cape from behind, you can literally see 3 moons invoking the imagery of Tyevat's 3 moon sisters. On top of that, in Fly Me to the Moon, Kiana goes through 60 levels on her quest to find the eclipse, but the catch is that when she makes it to level 60, she never ends up finding it. While Paimon's birthday in Genshin is June 1st, which is read as 6-1, in other words, 61. Furthermore, back in 2021, in an attempt to convince Elon Musk to play Genshin Impact back when SpaceX was booming, Hoyoverse made a side account to Genshin on Twitter. This was before Musk bought Twitter and renamed it to X, which they called Ella Musk, and the handle of that account is literally called Paimon to the Moon. You can go and check it right now, they still post there. So Paimon being born on 6-1 is not a coincidence. This is very much deliberate by the developers because Paimon's, or should I say Kiana's, journey through Tyevat is the missing and hopefully final level of Fly Me to the Moon. This is why I believe that Paimon in the future will be the one to help the Traveler in jumping Rerir. Think about it. If Rerir's objective of hunting the Crimson Moon is more literal than metaphorical, then what exactly does he plan to do with the moon at that point? You see, here's the thing. You need the sun and the moon to form an eclipse, and if the solar eclipse is indeed the ring of Nibelung, then Rerir's goal may be far more dangerous than simple vengeance. What if Rerir, the Rerir of Solnari, is attempting to arrest the Crimson Moon in order to rearrange its position and form a new moon syzygy, a solar eclipse? What if Rerir is trying to reforge the Ring of Nibelung? With that being said, how on Tyevat could the eclipse be Nibelung's ring if both the sun and the moon did not exist before the primordial one? That is, at least if the Byakuya collection is to be trusted. The answer to this is quite simple. Dainsleif says that history is written by the victors of war. In the war between the dragon sovereigns and the primordial one, the latter was the victor, and history has been, literally, written by them, since the false sky works as a mechanism with Irminsul to dictate the fate of everyone in the world. So knowing that the sky of Tyevat is false, then it follows that whatever is displayed on it could potentially be false as well, including the visible sun and moon. Therefore, nothing really prevents the Light Realm from having had access to the real sun and moon in the past, which could form the true eclipse, the one that the Conrians were vying after. Or perhaps, in that era, the sun and the moon were always conjoined as the ring of the eclipse, and time itself was under the complete dominion of the Dragon King. This technically fits with all of the aforementioned commonalities that Genshin has with Dark Souls, because before the Lord of Sunlight Gwyn defeated the ancient dragons, time had no meaning. In other words, before the primordial one, the sun and the moon required to form the ring would have belonged to Nibelung. And what's funny is that I can actually kinda prove this. You see, one of the most peculiar things about Morax is that he is draconic in appearance. His attire has dragon motifs, and his dragon form is based on Huanglong, the yellow dragon of Chinese mythology. This is all super important because Morax also references the Jade Emperor, the god of gods, you know, like the king of sovereigns? And the reason all of that matters is because contextually, Rex Lapis is the god of gold and is often symbolized by the sun, especially in his divine depictions. And the ring that forms around the moon during an annular solar eclipse is a byproduct of the sun's corona, which doesn't sound that relevant until you realize that the sun in Western alchemy is the symbol of gold. And if you recall, the Ring of Nibelung was fashioned out of the Rhine gold that Albric stole from the 3 Rhine maidens. Do you see what I see now? Huh? Okay, this is honestly getting comedically oversaturated at this point. Let's just cut to the outro. Overall, the main purpose of this video is to serve as a baseline for a number of details which might become relevant in the near future with Natlan, especially since Natlan is a nation that will heavily incorporate the sun and the moon, as their god, Mahoika, has sun symbolism in her eyes, while Ixbalanque is a legendary Mayan deity of the moon. Who knows? If we are lucky enough, we might even get to see Rerir. This is why, in my previous video about the 5 sinners, I talked about how we should pay attention to any hints or details about Rerir. When I first heard his name from Dainsleif during the Arkan Quest bedtime story, I stopped and told myself, wait, isn't Rerir the same guy who is the father of King Volsung of Hunaland? Immediately from that point, I knew that Rerir is going to likely be a very important character in the future, even by the standards of the gods. I just didn't have enough time to articulate all of this, and Simulanka gave me the perfect opportunity. Whatever the disaster was that led to the Conrian cataclysm and the collapse of the Eclipse dynasty, judging by the presence of the Crimson Moon both physically and contextually, it certainly had a hand in the fall of Conria. Additionally, the Crimson Moon being the result of the opposite syzygy from a solar eclipse could explain the mechanism that led to the disaster. Perhaps the disaster had to do with a gigantic misalignment in the moon's position, leading to a lunar eclipse instead of a solar one when the latter was needed. This is all really cool to think about, and the connection between Paimon and Rerir could produce an excellent storyline if it turns out to be true in the future. Nonetheless, this is all extremely heavy speculation based on external sources that directly inspire Genshin Impact, but are not Genshin Impact at the end of the day. I suppose I should also add this. If you are someone who is new to this channel, for example, if this is your first time watching and you somehow made it till the end, which I honestly have no idea how the statistics on that would map out, but let me tell you this, it's pretty rare. Anyway, I just want to let you know that the brief summary I included of the Angel's Egg for the sake of making a point does not do it justice. The amount of parallels, whether coincidental or intentional, that OVA has with Genshin are insane. You could literally go and move from scene to scene, and in every frame you will find at least one, usually multiple, but at least one thing to talk about in the context of Genshin Impact. And by the way, we do have evidence of Loreverse using themes from the Angel's Egg in the storyline of Penacony and Honkai Star Rail, so we know that they know about it. I'm honestly considering making a video to highlight all of the similarities and Easter eggs between the Angel's Egg and Genshin sometime in the future, but I'm gonna have to see how I should go about doing that first. Anyway, if you watched this and you are interested in the Angel's Egg, I highly recommend you check out this video on the top right corner by Vati Video, where he explains how the Angel's Egg influenced the design of Princess Filianore in Dark Souls 3. His video was so good that it single-handedly inspired me to make the 1 hour and 20-minute long movie that I made about Dainsleif and the Angel's Egg. Well, this has been a super long video about Rerir and the Ring of the Eclipse. Around 20 minutes longer than intended, actually. But hey, it is what it is. I hope you enjoyed. As always, huge thanks to everyone who supports this channel on Patreon, and thank you all for watching till here. For now, I've been My Name for Now, and I will see you in the next time. Take care.